Imagine you're trying to survive this brutal, just freezing blizzard, right?
Mhm.
And you are wrapped in this massive, heavy suit of winter armor.
Like the kind of armor where you can barely move, but it's completely necessary.
Exactly. That suit is literally the only thing keeping you alive. It protects you from the biting wind, it insulates you, and, does its job perfectly.
You absolutely wouldn't have survived this storm without it.
Right. But then what happens when the storm finally ends? You make it inside, the seasons change, and suddenly it's the middle of summer.
But you're still wearing the armor.
Yes. Your brain just refuses to let you take that heavy armor off. So now you are sweating, you are exhausted, you can barely lift your arms to, hug your family.
And the armor is just completely dragging you down.
Exactly.
The real tragedy of that scenario is how society traditionally responds to the person stuck in the armor.
Oh, for sure.
They are almost always told that they're broken. I mean, the prevailing narrative in mental health for decades, both in clinical settings and just, in pop culture, has been this framework built entirely on pathology.
Like you have a symptom, so you must be defective.
Right. You have a symptom, therefore a part of your brain or your personality is just busted. It gets treated like a car with a blown transmission.
Well, welcome into this deep dive, custom tailored exactly for you. Today, we are looking at a really fascinating stack of clinical notes, service details, and foundational philosophies from a telehealth therapy practice.
Yeah, they're based down in Georgia, Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC.
Right, CHC. And our mission today is basically twofold. First, we're going to explore this radical, truly empowering shift in how we view trauma and mental health.
Which is so desperately needed.
It really is. And second, we are going to examine how modern telehealth infrastructure is essentially just stripping away the traditional systemic barriers to getting highly specialized care.
Because we aren't just talking about abstract theory here. We are talking about tangible, real-world application.
Yeah, and the sources you've looked at, they provide a really incredible look at both the philosophy of healing and the actual, practical logistics of making that healing accessible.
It completely bridges the gap between profound psychological insight and the sheer mechanics of healthcare delivery. And honestly, it really all hinges on one specific line from their clinical note.
Oh, the one about the armor.
Exactly. It directly addresses the person still wearing that winter armor in the middle of summer.
That single sentence, it completely stops you in your tracks. The text reads, and I quote, "For anyone carrying something heavy for a long time, you are not broken. You adapted to survive."
I love that quote. That reframe completely changes the diagnostic landscape.
Why is that?
Because it immediately removes the shame. When the text says, you adapted to survive, it forces us to acknowledge that these heavy, exhausting behaviors, whether that's hypervigilance, emotional numbing, severe anxiety, or even anger, they aren't malfunction.
Right, they're actually successful.
Exactly. They are highly successful survival mechanisms. The body and the mind did exactly what they needed to do in a moment of extreme danger or, prolonged stress. The organism successfully protected itself.
So going back to the armor analogy, the armor isn't broken.
No, not at all.
It's just no longer useful for the current environment. It's just heavy.
Exactly. The brain's threat detection center, which is the amygdala, it doesn't automatically know the blizzard is over.
It just knows the armor worked yesterday.
Right. It knows the armor kept you alive yesterday, so you better keep it on today just in case. From a purely biological standpoint, exhaustion is always preferable to vulnerability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The nervous system would literally rather you be tired and guarded than relaxed and dead.
That makes so much sense. But, okay, if our survival mechanisms are just these outdated adaptations, if the armor's just stuck on us because the amygdala hasn't gotten the memo, how do we actually go about updating the system?
Well, the source material notes that the primary goal of this kind of specialized therapy is to help, quote, the nervous system finally know the danger has passed.
Right, and it makes a really striking observation about that process. It says trauma therapy is quieter than people expect and more powerful than they imagine.
Which is so interesting because that runs completely counter to the Hollywood version of catharsis, right?
Oh, yeah. Like when I picture trauma therapy, I picture this dramatic movie scene.
Exactly. Someone screaming into a pillow or weeping uncontrollably in some sterile office.
Yeah, or reliving the absolute worst moments of their life in vivid detail. while, like, dramatic music swells in the background.
Right, but the clinical reality that CHC focuses on is entirely different. They utilize highly specific, evidence-based trauma modalities.
Okay, let's talk about those.
Sure. We are talking about EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing,
Yeah.
PE or prolonged exposure, CPT, which is cognitive processing therapy, and IFS, internal family systems.
Okay, wait. I need to push back on one of those right away.
Which one?
You just listed off a bunch of clinical acronyms, and one of them is literally called prolonged exposure.
Ah, yes.
As someone who might be, carrying that heavy armor, prolonged exposure sounds intensely intimidating.
Mm.
Honestly, it sounds terrifying.
It does.
It sounds like you are being forced to go stand back out in the freezing blizzard. How does that possibly square with the text saying therapy is quieter, gentler than people expect?
Look, the naming conventions in psychology, they really don't always do us any favors in the public relations department.
No kidding.
Prolonged exposure totally sounds like an interrogation technique. But if we look at how the nervous system actually works, the methodology makes perfect sense.
How so?
Well, these evidence-based treatments are not about noisy, dramatic breakdowns or re-traumatizing the patient. Prolonged exposure is incredibly gradual.
Okay.
It's a highly controlled, safe environment where a person slowly approaches trauma-related memories or situations that they've been avoiding, but they do it step by tiny step.
So it's like taking off one piece of the heavy armor at a time.
Yes. It's the clinical equivalent of taking off one gauntlet, realizing you aren't freezing to death, letting the nervous system settle, and then taking off the next piece.
Okay, that sounds much less terrifying.
It is quiet, it is internal, it relies on habituation, which basically means teaching the body through safe, repeated, gentle exposure that the memory of the trauma cannot actually hurt you in the present.
All right, so I'm trying to picture the room for the other modalities then.
Yeah.
If the goal isn't a dramatic emotional release, what is the patient actually doing during a session of, say, EMDR? How do you safely process a memory without just getting overwhelmed by the terror all over again?
EMDR is a perfect example of this quiet power. It uses what's called bilateral stimulation.
What is that?
It can be a few things, like side-to-side eye movements, following a therapist's fingers, or even holding little buzzers in your hands that gently tap left and right.
Oh,
And you do this while briefly focusing on a distressing memory. The goal isn't to relive the terror, it's to keep the brain anchored in the safe, physical present moment while the memory is being accessed.
because you're physically feeling the buzzers.
Exactly. The bilateral stimulation literally taxes the brain's working memory.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
It gives the brain something physical to focus on so it can't fully dive back into the panic.
You hit the nail on the head. It occupies just enough mental bandwidth so that the emotional charge of the trauma gets stripped away.
Wow.
So the memory just gets filed properly into the brain's long-term storage as something that happened to you in the past, rather than feeling like a threat that is happening to you right now. You are safely, quietly guiding the body to realize the threat is over.
That is amazing. Okay, what about cognitive processing therapy, or CPT? Because trauma doesn't just leave us with physical panic, right? It leaves us with these awful mental loops.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we start believing things like, the world is completely dangerous, or I can't trust anyone ever.
And CPT targets those exact mental loops because trauma fundamentally shatters how we view ourselves, others, and just the world in general.
Right.
So CPT is a highly structured therapy that helps patients identify these stuck points. Stuck points.
Yeah. Let's say someone survives a terrible car accident. Their stuck point might be the belief that driving is a death trap and I have zero control.
Okay.
CPT quietly and methodically teaches the patient how to evaluate and challenge those extreme beliefs. It is about rewriting the cognitive narrative so the brain stops sending false alarm signals to the body.
So it's logic and restructuring, not screaming into a void.
Exactly.
Okay, and the last one you mentioned, IFS, or internal family systems. Honestly, it sounds like couples therapy, but for one person.
I love that description.
How does that fit into a quiet trauma treatment?
Well, IFS is fascinating because it visualizes the mind not as a single unified entity, but as a collection of different parts.
Like different personalities.
Not quite personalities, more like roles. The core philosophy is that our minds naturally fracture to protect us from severe pain.
Okay, follow.
So you might have a manager part that tries to keep everything perfectly controlled and organized so you never get hurt.
Oh, I definitely have one of those. Most of us do. And then you might have a firefighter part that jumps in with extreme behaviors like maybe substance abuse or sudden rage just to put out the flames of sudden emotional pain.
Wow.
And then underneath all that, you have the exiles. Those are the vulnerable parts holding the actual trauma that the managers and firefighters are trying to lock away.
So how do you treat that?
IFS is the quiet, compassionate work of getting to know these parts. It's about understanding that even the destructive parts are just trying to protect you. And eventually, you help them step back so your core self can lead again.
Man, it really is a physiological and psychological recalibration. It's like a software update for your operating system.
That's a great way to put it.
But here's the thing. Having all these powerful, quiet tools to heal the nervous system, it is completely useless if people can't reach them.
Right. Access is everything.
If you live 50 miles from the nearest specialist, or if a single session costs half your rent, all these brilliant evidence-based modalities might as well not exist.
And this brings us right to the second core element of the source material, the actual delivery mechanism.
Yes, coping and healing counseling.
Right. CHC operates entirely via telehealth. They are a 100% high-pay compliant virtual practice.
And the scale of this is what really caught my eye. The clinical notes specify they are reaching all 159 counties in Georgia.
Which is huge.
It is, because if you know the geography of Georgia, you know it is really unique. It has a massive rural footprint sitting right alongside major urban centers like Atlanta or Savannah.
Right. And historically, if you lived in one of those rural counties, your access to mental health care was a classic healthcare desert.
Exactly. You might have to drive 2 or 3 hours each way just to find a clinic, let alone trying to find a trauma specialist who is specifically trained in something like EMDR or IFS.
Geography has always been one of the cruelest gatekeepers in healthcare, but the CHC infrastructure completely erases that map.
Yeah, they have built this diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 licensed therapists.
And just to break down the clinical alphabet soup the sources use,
Please do.
they employ LCSWs, which are licensed clinical social workers. They are highly trained to understand how systemic and environmental issues impact mental health.
Well,
They also have LPCs, or licensed professional counselors, who focus on individual psychological growth, and LMFTs, licensed marriage and family therapists, who look at the whole relational dynamic.
so it isn't just a narrow focus either. Their scope covers individuals, couples, families, and even teens ages 13 and up.
And they offer life coaching, too.
Right. Their specialties cover anxiety, depression, trauma, and PTSD, grief, relationship issues, chronic stress. I mean, looking at this telehealth model, it feels like laying down a high-speed fiber optic network, but for mental health.
That is a brilliant analogy.
You are completely bypassing the old toll booths.
Yeah.
You bypass the 3-hour drive to a clinic. You bypass having to take an entire day off work.
You bypass the awkward waiting room?
Yes. You are putting a world-class clinic directly into someone's living room. Or, their parked car at a lunch break or wherever they feel safe enough to actually take the armor off.
And you are also bypassing the financial ruin that often accompanies specialized care, which is perhaps the most critical data point in this entire stack of sources.
The cost.
Exactly. CHC accepts Medicaid, which means a $0 copay for those patients.
Wow.
And they accept major commercial insurances, too. So we're talking Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield,
Okay.
United Healthcare, Humana. And for those patients, sessions range from just $0 to $40.
Wait, $40 maximum.
Excellent.
For highly specialized evidence-based trauma care from licensed professionals.
Yes.
That fundamentally changes the calculus for someone who is suffering. I mean, in an industry where out-of-pocket specialists can easily charge upwards of $200 an hour, CHC is no longer asking someone who is already exhausted by their trauma to also navigate geographic isolation and financial hardship just to get in the door.
They are meeting the patient exactly where they are.
It's incredible.
But, even when you erase the geography and even when you make it deeply affordable, there is still one final barrier.
Oh, what's that?
It's the internal reluctance.
Ah, right.
It is the sheer, overwhelming dread of having to actually initiate the conversation, of having to pick up a phone, look another human being in the face, and admit, I am carrying something heavy and I don't know how to stop.
That is so true. It's terrifying to take that first step.
Mm-hmm.
But the sources outline a very deliberate, engineered first step for patients or even, clinical partners trying to refer a patient who are hesitant to make that leap.
Right, the screener.
Yeah. CHC offers a free PCL5 screener right on their website. It's at techtherapy.com/mental-health-tests.
And for context, the PCL5 is a highly respected, standardized self-report measure used across the whole clinical world for assessing PTSD symptoms.
Okay, so it's a real tool.
Oh, absolutely. It's a clinically validated tool that gives providers a clear baseline of what the patient is experiencing.
To give you a sense of what this actually looks like, it isn't just asking, are you sad? The PCL5 asks these really concrete grounding questions.
Right.
It asks things like, in the past month, how much were you bothered by repeated, disturbing, and unwanted memories of the stressful experience? Or how much were you bothered by feeling very upset when something reminded you of a stressful experience?
It literally gives the user a vocabulary for the invisible weight they've been carrying.
And the way CFC deploys it is just brilliant in its simplicity. It's
Uh,
completely confidential. It scores instantly. And based on the results, it routes the user directly into specialty trauma care if they want it.
and they also provide direct contact options. So if you want to skip the test, they have a phone line at 404-832-0102.
And an email, right.
Yeah, support@checktherapy.com for those who are ready to reach out directly.
There was one specific, almost poetic note in the source text regarding this screener that I really wanted to examine.
Oh, about the timing.
Yes. The text says, quote, "The night is a good time to start privately with a screening."
It's such a specific detail.
Right. Like, why specifically mention the nighttime? Isn't taking a mental health test late at night, when we are usually exhausted and our defenses are down, isn't that potentially a bad idea?
Well, this raises an incredibly important question about how we actually experience trauma in our daily lives.
Okay.
Why the night? Because the night is when the noise of the day finally stops.
Oh.
During the day, you can distract yourself. You have work, you have errands, you have your phone, you have conversations with coworkers.
You stay busy.
Exactly. The daylight offers a million different ways to avoid looking at the armor you are wearing. You can stay busy enough to ignore the stiffness and the exhaustion.
But at 2 a.m., the distractions fade.
Yep. The house gets quiet.
It is just you and the armor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
At 2 a.m., the heavy things we carry become completely impossible to ignore. That is when the exhaustion of the adaptation really sets in. It's probably the most vulnerable hour of the human experience.
Wow.
So providing a private, digital, instantly scoring entry point at that exact moment, it's profound.
It really is.
It's offering a lifeline when someone is finally alone with their thoughts and ready to take it. They don't have to wait until Monday morning at 9 a.m. to call a receptionist.
By which time they might have just talked themselves out of it.
Exactly. They don't have to explain themselves to a human being right away. They can just sit in the dark on their phone or their computer, take a confidential screener, and take that massive first step toward healing in total privacy.
It honors the reality of the patient's experience. It allows them to initiate their healing on their own terms at the exact moment their armor feels the heaviest.
It really is the ultimate expression of the core philosophy we started with. It removes the shame, it removes the friction, and it validates their reality.
Looking back at the journey we've taken in this deep dive, it is such an incredibly cohesive ecosystem of care.
It really is.
We started by completely reframing how we understand our own burdens.
Yep.
They aren't signs that you are permanently broken. They are brilliant, successful survival adaptations that kept you alive during the blizzard.
Right. And from there, we explored the actual mechanics of updating that survival system. We looked at the quiet, methodical power of evidence-based therapies.
Like EMDR and CPT.
Exactly. And IFS and prolonged exposure. Tools that safely teach the nervous system the danger is finally gone without requiring some theatrical breakdown.
And then we saw how a modern telehealth practice like coping and healing counseling takes those specialized, quiet tools and just blasts them out across an entire state, all 159 counties in Georgia.
They remove the geographic tool booths, they make it financially accessible through Medicaid and commercial insurance, and they provide that safe, private, late-night doorway for those who are just scared to take the first step.
It is a complete pipeline from isolation to empowerment.
And as we wrap up our exploration of these notes, I really want to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
We spent a lot of time today talking about adaptation, about how the text says, you adapted to survive. I want you to consider the sheer power of that biological reality. If our nervous systems are so incredibly efficient and powerful that they can adapt to survive severe trauma in the dark without us even consciously giving them permission to do so, imagine the limitless untapped potential of what that same nervous system can achieve when we actively, consciously guide it toward healing in the light.
Wow. That is a truly powerful place to leave it. Thank you for joining us today for this exploration curated and custom tailored just for you. Keep asking questions, keep challenging the narratives you've been given, and most importantly, stay curious. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.